go ahead and get started. And I just wanted to kind of kick this off a little bit since we have several council members who were not here last year to give you an idea of why we're even here. So there have been in the last 25 years, 5 proposals for a new city hall. And none of them were successful in moving forward. And I felt that one of the important points for us to know was what our space needs are. And that would be a good place to start. And so we put in the budget the money in the current budget for the space study. And the technical team and our steering committee and all of those who've worked on this have been very open-minded. We have not been looking at a specific solution yet, because we wanted to know what we needed. And we're trying to keep that kind of open mind about where we go with this so that together we can get there. Finally. Right? This council can be the council that brings it home. Woohoo! So, with that, you said it. I agree. So with that, I wanted to thank Brandy Peacher. Where are you, Brandy? Yes. Who has been our point person on this, and I wonder if you would introduce our consultants.
That's definitely, thanks, Mayor.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad that we're at this point. We've had a team working with us very hard and very diligently over the past 10 weeks, 12 weeks. I've lost track of time. But we hired on Ernst & Young and Kersey & Kersey, who teamed up for this project. And as they present, I'll let them introduce themselves individually. But just so you understand, when we were looking for a consultant for this project, we were not looking for a design. Though that was not the point of this effort. This effort was to truly analyze who are we as a government, how do we operate, what kind of space do we need before we actually proceed to where do we go, what do we look like. And so this team that's made up from a large company from Ernst & Young has such a wonderful portfolio and experience in this realm that we've learned a lot from them. So I look forward to that. So I'm going to hand it off to Catherine and let you introduce your team and kick us off for this workshop.
Thank you very much. We're excited to be here with you this afternoon and share with you some of our findings and recommendations. My name is Catherine Von Sager, and as Brandy said, with Ernst & Young, and we're in our real estate advisory practice, where we do a lot of work with the government and public sector clients around their real estate plans, feasibility studies. And so we've been really excited to share some of the insights and our experience with the team. Everybody has been super helpful. You'll see on some of the slides, there have been many, many people that we have spoken with over the course of the past several weeks. Lots of information, and everybody's been super helpful in helping us learn about how you work today, what your space needs are, some of the challenges. So we really couldn't have done that without your help and support. I'm going to let my team sort of introduce themselves as when we get to the slides that they're talking to. We do have Carol from Kersey & Kersey. They've been super helpful on some of the space planning standards that we've used and incorporated into this study. So who's changing the slide? Yeah, great. So we would like this to be a bit, interactive. If you have questions, please feel free to, raise your hand or jump in and ask a question. But our goal here today is to talk to you about what our findings were, what some of those recommendations might be, but to give you a bit of context on how we got there, what our approach was, the type of work and analysis that we did over the past several weeks. Talk a little bit about how these findings and information can be used for you going forward, and most importantly, seeking your, input and feedback on what we've pulled together to make sure that we've gotten everything, documented and done correctly. You all have a copy, I think, in front of you. If we go to the next slide, please, Claire. This is sort of like a helpful tool. There are a lot of acronyms within this document and deck. Probably all much more familiar to you than they were to us, but still a helpful tool that you can refer back to if needed. All right, as I said, the team that worked here on the project from EY is on the far right. I'm Catherine Von Sager, and Mark should be joining us in just a minute. And as you can see from the city side, right, Brandy was our key go-to person in giving us guidance and direction, but there was a number of people as part of the steering committee and the tactical team that we worked with on a daily and weekly basis in pulling this information together. So thank you, everybody. I think a little bit that Brandy covered some of this, but this is just to sort of state the facts here. We weren't doing a site selection study to identify a potential future location for the City Hall. We did not look at a true facilities condition assessment where we, assess the deferred maintenance and other facility condition needs for these buildings. It is not a formal design. You will see we did some stacking and blocking based on some of the adjacency information that we heard and just looking at some of the current floor plates, so we'll share some of that with you. And this was not about, funding and how you were going to, move forward to the next step, if you will. But hopefully it will be a useful tool as you start to think about what those space requirements are going to be in the future and your new ways of working. Go to the next slide. For those of you who didn't have, sort of the guidance, this is really the sort of the one-page project overview of what we did. We established some guiding principles at the outset of the project, really to guide our thinking and how we went about the study, right? Making sure we were incorporating the feedback from the steering committee, making sure that we were speaking to each of the departments to understand specifically what their needs were, making sure that our recommendations really were, when I say balanced, based on, and we say change management, that's because, different organizations want to take these types of changes to different extremes, if you will. Some want to go from everybody having an office, a seat and a desk to nobody having an office, seat and a desk, right? So we wanted to make sure we understand what was going to work best for you, for your mission, for your ways of working, and incorporating that thinking into our study. So we started this back in early April, a process of gathering information. We did site visits, we conducted a number of interviews, we went through a bunch of documentation and information on your head count and your growth projections, and then your future space needs. We spent time really analyzing the departments and how they worked, and what those sort of adjacency requirements were going to be, and then worked through identifying some of the opportunities. And you can see we came back with some recommendations of some different alternatives for future ways of working. We did a little bit of an analysis that would give you some ideas of what potential options could look like from a location perspective, and we'll share some of those with you today. Next slide. So I think probably some of this would look familiar as you look at the situation with where you are today, right? You've been operating, occupying the government center, these three buildings, for a number of years, and while you've made some changes to the buildings to accommodate your ways of working, they've been more about fitting into the space that you have than really retrofitting the space to meet all of your needs. It's a historic building, which brings its own unique challenges, what we have found, or what we found in doing the analysis and the overviews, is you've really, I say, made do with what you have, right? Departments have moved into space because it's available to them, and that hasn't been optimal maybe for all of you in the ways of working with, working between different buildings or between different floors, that's not optimizing your collaboration or your ways of working. And so when we talk about, some of the complications or what we heard with the building, right? There is some deferred maintenance in these facilities that need to be addressed. There are challenges with technology, IT, Wi-Fi access. There are challenges with the customer and visitor access into the buildings, right? You've had to put some new policies in place to make sure that people are being escorted through the buildings or to the floors appropriately. And we talked a little bit about those ways of working and how they could be better enhanced now that more virtual, more people on Zoom calls. How do you bring technology in to support these new ways of working? So our real objective was, how do we, what should the future of the City Hall look like, given how you're going to be working in the future, given your growth requirements, looking at different ways of working. How could we try to meet those requirements from a business perspective, a department perspective, allocating your spaces, working to bring those adjacencies together, as well as addressing some of the opportunities and features that were identified as part of the interviews with the departments. Things like break rooms and places to sit, to have lunch and to eat, congregate. Next slide. This should look familiar. These are your three buildings. Today, the three buildings, the City Hall complex has 561 occupants. So those are people working within the buildings across 523 work seats. So those are counting your offices and your cubicles, not addressing, common area space such as this. So when we go to the scenario analysis, right, some of that analysis looks at what could the future be within this footprint. Any questions before we dive into the meat of it? No? All right. I'm going to turn it to Emily. Hi. You want to move front?
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Summers. I have 17 years of experience in the corporate real estate industry. I've been in consulting for 2 years and spent 15 years in the industry before coming here. So I'm going to go through really the future space needs, right? What came out of this study? What is the output from it? So this is our high-level summary of that, right? We wanted to do a comparison of where you are today versus where we think you could be in the future, right? Based on how you're working. So as Catherine mentioned, you guys currently occupy about 250,000 gross square feet in those three buildings that were in our scope. In the future, we see that going down to about 160,000 gross square feet of need. So you may ask, well, how did that happen? How did we lose, roughly 90,000 square feet? And I wouldn't look at it that way, but there are three different space levers that are resulting in that square footage change, right? The first one being those new space standards. So if you walk through the government center today, most employees have offices, right? And they're quite large against industry standards, right? You're looking at 200, 300 square foot offices. Traditionally, you're closer to the 100 to 150 square feet for an office. So you have very large sized offices today within your footprint. When we introduce these space standards and bring you more toward industry norms, that would shrink the individual office footprint or size, right? The second thing that reduces your footprint is sharing. So you do have a portion of your population today that operates in this hybrid or remote work style. And what that means is that they're not in the office every day, all day, right? You have field inspectors that come in, they pop in for the morning for about 15 to 30 minutes, then they're out in the field, right? They don't need an assigned desk, right? They can share that desk across multiple individuals. And so that's where you introduce this desk sharing ratio. And what happens also is as you introduce these space standards and shrink down kind of the individual work seat, I'll call it, size, you open up some space for more collaborative type of rooms, more meeting rooms, more individual phone rooms, right? As you move to this open environment, people will need a space to have confidential conversations. They need a space to go meet with people. Where meetings occur today, maybe in the office, if that office is smaller, they'll need to have some other place to go to have that meeting, right? So we're introducing new kind of common collaborative spaces that will support this new environment. Does that make sense? All right, so just some of the metrics down here, you can see that we're actually decreasing the number of work seats. Again, this is driven by the sharing of work seats. It's no longer a one-to-one assignment, meaning that each individual has an assigned desk when they come into the office. This is what you've seen really since COVID. Most industries, private sector and public sector, are moving toward this, where they're having people share work seats that come in the office 2 to 3 days a week, or perhaps come in for short periods of time per day. We also have accounted for some growth, right? So we want to look out 5 to 10 years, right? You're looking at a significant investment, and because of that, you want to account for the growth that you anticipate. So right now, the model incorporates a 3% growth, which is roughly about 15 to 20 new positions over the course of the time frame. So you can actually accommodate more people within less space because you've applied the space standards and you have sharing of seats. Questions on this slide?
I do. I have a question. So with this study, no person has their own desk at all.
No,
No.
we'll get to that because
Okay.
there is a scenario that we
Okay.
looked at that would have gone that route.
Okay.
However, there are a significant portion of your population that we would call on-premise. They spend the majority of their day on site, the full 8 hours of their day. They would have an assigned seat. And then there's a portion of your population that is hybrid or remote, meaning that they're only in the office for a few days or a few shortened periods of time throughout the week. They would not have assigned seats.
And my guess is when you looked at the hybrids, like you're also assuming that people will work from home as well. Did you take that into account, or are you only taking into account the fact that this worker actually works in the field
No.
17 hours a week?
It accounts for people working from home. We've had conversations with your IT department. We understand there's some issues with some of the VPN, and the current technology in place requires people to actually remote desktop in, which is saying that when they go home, they need a physical computer sitting on site for them to get onto the network. IT is currently looking at a project to implement VPN, which would be broadly accessible across your organization, to enable hybrid workers to get into the network without requiring a physical presence of a laptop or computer within City Hall. That is a key enabler to this, absolutely. We've had those conversations.
But I think we looked at those 3 different type of workers, right? So we looked at the folks who need to be on-prem sort of 5 days a week. We looked at that hybrid population who have flexibility to be in the office a couple of days or work from home a couple of days. And then sort of that third group is more the field workers, as you mentioned, who maybe don't come in at all, maybe come in for an hour in the morning and an hour at the end of the day, right? Who sort of don't really need their own dedicated desk all of the time, but do come into the office and need a place to sit.
And just to follow up, did you also look at security, like, for instance, our payroll people probably need a different level of security access to their area?
Yep. It's a great
We
point.
did.
That is something that we took into account when we've designed something called the Financial Services Center, and the Development Services Center would be a separate area where customers can come in, and it's designed to handle that type of security.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Lost my notes. Maybe I don't need to. Okay. So as part of this process, we actually went out to 81 different sections and divisions within your organization that occupy space within City Hall today. And they sent back all of their data to us, which included those questions on how many of your current teams operate in the on-premise, the hybrid, or the remote work styles. And that's how we pull all that data from your organization and we put it into something that we call the space model. And what the space model then does is helps us understand your customized future space needs, right? We have the ability to customize various different space levers within that model. And then this is the output from that model. We tell us kind of what is our future needs for usable or gross square footage. We did run 3 different strategic scenarios through that future space model, and I'm going to walk you through real quickly. So the first one is traditional. This would be closer to what you guys operate in today. Mainly offices, almost 100% one-to-one assignment of an office. Everybody has an assigned seat, and you're seeing our gross square footage of roughly 265,000. And you may say, well, that's bigger than we have today. Remember how I previously said we have about 248,000 gross square feet across your 3 buildings today. Part of that is because we've introduced these new common space types. We've increased the size of your council chambers. We've added a break area, a centralized break area. We've added some additional collaboration and meeting type of rooms. From what we've heard from your departments, those are needed space types for them to be productive and efficient in delivering their work. So we've introduced some additional space types into all 3 of these scenarios. And that's why you see scenario 1 actually driving it larger than where you are today. And one thing I want to point out, just kind of on the right, skipped over this, but percentage of office to cubicle. Right now, you guys are roughly 67% office to cubicle when we look at an aggregate across all 3 of your buildings, okay? So very close to that traditional, which we ran through the model, about 70%. When we move to the balanced strategic scenario, what we've done is we've changed a few of the space levers. We've said, okay, in the future, we're gonna build in 40% office and 60% cubicles, okay? We've also changed the seat sharing. We've introduced the sharing of seats for your hybrid and your remote work styles. So those positions that have hybrid or remote work will not be assigned a seat. They would be assigned to a neighborhood where they could come in and find a seat or reserve that seat when they needed to be in the office. And what that results in is about 160,000 gross square feet. The last strategic scenario that we looked at was actually our aggressive strategic scenario. And this is actually on the opposite side of where you guys are today. This is roughly 20% office and 80% open floor plan. As Catherine mentioned, I think COVID was a catalyst for a lot of organizations to truly look at their real estate needs, right? Real estate is a very expensive component of a lot of organizations' operating budgets, right? And so some organizations are actually moving to this. This is where you have majority unassigned seating. Everybody is sharing seats. They're reserving the seat before they come in on that specific day. And a lot more people are in cubicles, right? Very, very few offices, typically on the interior of your floor plate, so that your windows allow natural light to all of the cubicles that are more along the perimeter. I'm gonna pause, it's a lot. So what we did is we had a lot of conversations with your tactical team and with the steering committee. And we decided that strategic scenario number 2, roughly 160,000 gross square feet, was a scenario that we were gonna move forward with for the rest of our analysis. Just given where you guys are today, balancing your change management, but also pushing you guys a little bit, right? Questions?
So with the situation you shared where there would be no seat assignation for some hybrid and remote workers, does that mean that they would need to coordinate with other hybrid and remote workers to ensure that there would be some kind of space for them? And in that case, also would the majority of their files be, I guess, digital in terms of where they keep their things? Because I have worked in cubicles, I've worked in open office plans, I've had my own office, I've shared an office in lots of different situations, but I'm just kind of wondering about that sense of place for them.
Yes, absolutely. And we will get to that in the future. We'll give kind of more of a breakdown of what goes into that 160,000 square feet, but there is significant storage that we've accounted for in here. Whether or not that's a personal locker, typically somebody that has an unassigned seat that shares a seat would have a dedicated locker with a key, typically in a hallway, right, that they can come in, they can put their purse in there, their coat in there, their boots, they could technically put some daily files that they're working on, and then they would go find a seat, right? And then their stuff has some personal space, but it's not stored at the cubicle or the work seat itself because it is shared, right? But they could bring it with them on the day that they need it, but there is some personal lockage. We've also incorporated a lot of department level storage, so there would be storage built into that department allocated space, whether that's for shared files, department level files, files that need to be on site and can't be sent off site.
And we'd need to put in a reservation system, right? Where you could go on your phone, say you're coming in, pick the space that you're gonna sit in and reserve it. I mean, it's not like you'd have to call your other hybrid workers and see who was coming in for the day and who's gonna sit where. You would need some technology to support you.
And I think the other thing that I would add to that is it's not just a free-for-all, right? It's not like all hybrid workers and remote workers have to go find seats anywhere within the city hall. It's within their department footprint.
Sure.
So within that department footprint, there's a certain number of seats that are shared across that whole department. The department can make the decision, right? Until you guys decide or even move forward with an IT reservation system, that manager could say, okay, so-and-so you're in on this day and so-and-so you're in on this day, and provide more structured guidance on when those hybrid or remote employees are in the office, right?
And let me add just a little bit more context. I met with every department, every division director to discuss position by position, what are their needs. And so this 40% does not mean that we apply 40% to each division. This is government-wide. So, for instance, if we're talking about the law department, they may need more private offices than building inspection, where 80% of their folks are out in the field all day long working on an iPad. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers, that when we do get to a level of design, these numbers will start to be a little bit more refined by each division.
So, question, just visualizing in my mind, if a department or a floor had like 12 workers, and we had, it wouldn't be that like Jennifer and I would share a desk all the time. It would be the 12 of us have access to the 6 desks, and if there's a reservation system or whatever,
Correct.
to do that. And then everybody has, I guess, just a station computer with different logins to access it.
Yeah, I think what we see typically is that people are assigned an individual laptop, and there would be something called a docking station. So you can come and dock in your own individual laptop, so you're not necessarily sharing a desktop at that
I had
station.
some IT concerns there.
Yeah, this is, I mean, there's a lot of IT that goes hand in hand with your real estate.
Keep in mind there's still assigned seats in these models as well, right? For folks that are considered on-premise workers in the building the majority of the time, still getting an assigned seat where you can go to every day.
Yeah. So your 12 people may have 6 assigned offices because those folks are in every day, and you may have, 4 of you sharing 2 or 3 desks because you come in twice a week.
And I think for council, if I recall correctly, I think that it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio within the model right now. All council members would have assigned offices, right? And so even that hybrid and remote work style, it doesn't mean they're in a cubicle. There could still be offices that are shared, right? But for council and for some other departments, like they have on-premise workers every day, based on their work styles, they may have a 1-to-1 ratio within that department. But on average, as Brandy said, this is aggregated across those roughly 573 positions across all of City Hall facilities.
Yeah, and have you guys actually done this for city governments before? So, because I'm sure every city government also has their own culture, so it could be that this city government's planning department is kind of like prima donnas, and this one isn't. So these guys are okay with doing this, these guys aren't okay with doing that. Do you deal with that, or did you provide, and I didn't mean that by our people.
No prima donnas.
Are you providing us best practices for a city government, or you're just kind of?
No, this is specific to you, right?
Specific to us. So it takes into account our culture.
Absolutely. This
Okay.
has
That's fine.
81 department data responses. I mean, we have worked the data several different ways with Brandy, right? She has gone out and piloted and had various different conversations with directors
Okay.
to confirm that. So,
Thank you.
And just to give you some context, right? So, we talk about the balanced scenario here, right, as being a good mix for you. If you were to actually compare that to some other cities, you're probably a bit more traditional than we might see elsewhere. So arguably you're moving towards the top a little bit, where maybe
Yeah.
some of our other city clients are moving a little bit further towards the aggressive.
Yeah.
It's rare to see a city client that goes all in on an aggressive type of scenario, because it's just not really the nature of what you do. But you would be a bit more traditional based on what we've
I guess
uncovered.
I would just be looking for you to advise as well, like, and just say, you're going to go here eventually, so plan on that. Or whatever.
Right, and look at the comment about the
Best
like the
practices.
lockers, right?
Yeah.
whenever we move from a one-to-one, everybody having their own desk, you're always building in lockers into the solution so people have a place to put their things. By the time, 7 years out, nobody's gonna put anything in a locker. You're gonna be carrying with you what you want for the day.
Okay.
So,
But it's a change management. We gotta go through the process.
So
Sorry.
can, just to better help me see this, can you give me an example of a department where not having an assigned desk or where they would need to reserve a desk that this will work for?
Yeah, so was it HANCD?
Yeah.
HANCD, so your housing
Like code
advocacy,
What is that?
housing,
Sorry,
enforcement.
housing advocacy and community development. But code enforcement, for example, I
Okay.
think they had a lot of people in the field, and they were like, we don't need these desks. They just said it. We're like, oh, makes this easy. But essentially, like a model where they could reserve the space they need for when they need to come in. You can reduce your square footage significantly, and then open up more space for different space types. For collaboration, or what is the purpose for them coming in? It's to meet with each other. Then they would need more meeting spaces as opposed to just a cubicle with a workstation that is always sitting vacant.
Okay, thank you.
well, a lot of your IT departments are already remote, right? So that was an opportunity as well.
Well, and even if
That
somebody
helped.
had to come in like off the books, if you want to say that, there would be these extra. Not on reservation.
I see that.
Touchdown, say, had to
Touchdown
come in
space.
last minute and not reserve a space, that they would have this extra space that they could land in.
And even for departments that are not located downtown, right? If you have people coming from parks or somewhere else for a meeting, and they need a place to go for a few hours, that's why we build in the touchdown and some of these flex concepts. So,
Okay.
yeah, just know we never like max these out to the point that you need 10, you get 10. There's always more in there.
I have a question. So I'm having a hard time switching all the way from traditional to the number 2 option, because it is a very big change from our culture. But I understand that, like you said, there's different departments that are not using their space all the time. But there's a lot of offices that have meetings and confidential meetings, and I feel like really need the space. And it would be very inconvenient and somewhat stressful at times to have to reserve, where you're going to be, put your things in a locker, feel like you don't have a place that you can permanently be or meet with people, because all of us are meeting with people constantly, or most of us. And so I just feel like that could add a real level of stress to the workplace, and I didn't know if there was an option kind of between the traditional and balanced that allowed for a little more space, but obviously some flexibility as well.
I think one thing that I would say, and I know we kind of grounded you guys in the 248,000 gross square feet that you have today in these 3 complexes, they're not very efficient. If you guys walk down your hallways, you have very wide hallways, right? And the floor plates and the floor plans aren't efficient today. So the 250 that you have today isn't probably utilized very well. So even though you're doing a comparison to say, oh my gosh, I'm going from 250 to 160, that's probably a poor comparison, because the 160 is going to be truly optimized, efficient layouts, better sized hallways, your support spaces are more readily available and designed correctly. So from that standpoint, it's probably not the best comparison. But to your question about kind of the personal space, yes, it's a huge change management lift. We understand that. We've seen other clients have to go through it. That desk is how they define themselves, all the trinkets, all the pictures, right? Going to more of a shared space, it's hard. It is definitely hard. I'm not gonna disagree with that.
But I think you need to look at, we really did talk to each department to understand each department's needs and requirements. So if you were, when we had that conversation, it was probably, we do meetings all day long, every day. We need to make sure we have a private office where we can do that meeting. We need, office space. It was very customized, if you will, based on the feedback that each of the departments gave us for the way that they work and who they need to interact and collaborate with.
And the other thing that I would say is that the collaboration rooms are designed at the department level, right? So if a department, let's hypothetically say, is getting 50 individual workstations, right? We use gearing ratios, industry gearing ratios, to say based on that, you're going to get 2 huddle rooms, we call them, and those would be 4-seat collaboration rooms. We also know per the interview with you that you have large team meetings. You're going to need a collaboration room that seats 12 on a monthly basis. We added that into the space model. So those collaboration rooms are directly on the same floor within the footprint of the departments. They have easy access to it. It's their conference room or collaboration room, right? You're not sharing it with a bunch of different departments.
The next slide kind of.
Yeah, if we want to hop to the next slide, so this is a high-level summary of our space standards that went into this space model. We do have a lot more detail and slides behind this, but we just wanted to provide you guys a summary of this. So really 2 different types of seating here. On your top, you're going to have your individual seating space standards. And this spans really the whole spectrum, right? You can start on the right-hand side and you have your bench cubicles. And these will be for those type of employees that are only coming in for short periods of time on a daily or a few days a week, right? It's your field inspector. I know that a lot of people see this and get very concerned. I think overall we ended up with only 40 workstations that are going to be bench cubicles in the final output, right? So it's a very small portion. Less than 10% of the future work seats would be these bench cubicles.
And really, we were advised by some of those departments that that would meet their needs and their requirements. It wasn't like we were trying to force them into it. They said, "This all we need is a desk where we can sit down, plug in, look at our email, and leave."
And they're also telling us, really, when those people come in, we're going into large meetings. We're having our staff meeting. We're meeting, every week, and they all have to be in for an hour. So we need a 12-person seated conference room, and that's what we designed in their model. And maybe they have these for when they need to touch down. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you do have your executive office, right? So that's your 350 to 400 square foot type of office. That would allow you to have those private conversations, hold those meetings within in your actual office, right? On the bottom, you're going to see your collaboration work seats, right? And so these are the different types of support spaces that are designed within the department footprint to enable this open floor plan, right? As you introduce more cubicles into your floor plan, you need these type of private spaces where people can go and do heads down work. If they have focused work and they can't be sitting in an open environment that might be a little bit loud, they can go into a phone room. Or, to the point that you no longer have that office that is large enough to hold meetings, you have access to these medium or small conference rooms, 4 to 10 people that can sit there. The very right-hand side, these connection spaces, we heard a lot from the departments that break rooms are kind of afterthoughts within your current footprint, right? They're in closets or makeshift areas within the garage, right? Not necessarily the best place to eat your lunch. So a lot of people end up eating at their desk. Not ideal, right? Also know that the food options kind of directly outside of City Hall, you have to walk ways to get to them. So wanted to introduce these break areas, this open collaboration space, whether it's informal or formal. They did say they wanted to go be able to meet with their peers.
And I think we heard that pretty much universally across all departments, that perhaps the biggest thing missing in the 3 buildings is one central space for employees to come together on a somewhat informal basis and have a coffee, have a sandwich, whatever it may be.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Blair.
Okay, I'll just do a quick intro. I'm Blair Bossard. I'm also on the real estate advisory team at EY, and I've been in the industry for 7 years. I think the mic's over there, but if you can't hear me, let me know. So as Emily mentioned when she introduced the 3 strategic scenarios and moving into scenario 2 as the best option, this slide really provides a breakdown of what the future space needs would look like within this scenario. So as you'll see with the balanced scenario, about 80% of the total square footage will be dedicated to departments and their needs. So whether it's individual offices or more of the collaborative spaces or meeting spaces or individual in-suite lobbies for customers, that space will all be dedicated to the departments, and 20% would be to common space. So some of the community spaces, council chambers, And I think Emily touched on the new Development Services Center and Financial Services Center to help accommodate all the foot traffic in one place. So some of the key benefits of the future space breakdown. So as Emily mentioned, there'd be more of an employee focus. So even if we're pulling away some of the square footage from individual dedicated offices, and also to reiterate, not necessarily across the board, we really did listen to each individual department in our interviews and data responses, and if it was indicated that they do have confidential meetings all day and they need a dedicated office, they're accommodated in an individual office in the space model. But for some of the other groups where they are more of a hybrid model and can share space, that frees up square footage for some of these collaborative spaces, and also space types to help accommodate their needs if they don't have an office. So having a confidential meeting room like we saw in the previous slide. And also with that, the question came up about storage space. So making sure we have dedicated storage space such as lockers or department storage spaces if everyone doesn't have a filing cabinet under their desk like they're used to. And also some of these in-suite lobbies for more of the customer-facing departments. And also trying to co-locate some of the customer-facing departments together, so if they have customers that are likely to be coming to both places, they can meet in one lobby instead of needing to be escorted all throughout the building. And also some benefits are customer and community-focused spaces. So as I mentioned, the Financial Services Center, where all the customer-facing financial services would be in one place, so instead of the community coming into the building, not knowing where to go, getting confused or needing to be escorted, it would all be in one place. And we would also provide a similar space for the development services, so like planning services, code enforcement, historic preservation. It would be a one-stop shop for them to come in on a ground floor, so escorting is less of an issue and it's just less confusing and more efficient. And then also creating a larger council chamber and the addition of some community space to increase engagement from the public. We've heard in a lot of our interviews that one of the main challenges with this building and the layout is just tough to be welcoming to the community and be serving to the community. Any questions on either future space needs breakdown or some of the new space types? Yeah.
So if I'm just doing the math, it appears that you're saying that we could actually fit everything in this building.
No, so
This building, well, this building's 153,000 square feet.
So that's gross square footage. So assuming that there's like a 30% loss for structural components, elevators, restrooms, so we deducted that and used our floor plans that were provided from the General Services Department here to map out where all those departments would fit within the floor plans. But just understanding there's a...
So that's basically not, that's net square footage that you've added
usable.
there.
Yeah, it's usable square footage.
Usable, got it.
You'll need more than just this building.
So we
How
just
you
need to
achieve
add
that?
Add 2 floors.
That's an
Yeah.
option.
No, we're not going after solutions.
So when it comes to having a larger council chamber, if our current council chamber only holds about 95 people, how many people does that 4,100 hold?
So your current council chamber is about 2,800 square feet. So you're increasing the size by about 50%. That's how we look at it through a real estate lens. So I don't necessarily know the exact capacity that would bring.
It depends how you would configure it. And when we talk through the implementation options, like one of them, you would be essentially building a new council chambers. You will have more flexibility in what you do in that type of situation, but at least 50% larger. And we heard that.
That sounds good.
And also providing some of the waiting area space outside of the council chambers. A lot of the things that are challenging today as far as getting people in and seated comfortably. Any more questions? Okay. So on this slide, so one of the primary goals in this project was to gain a better understanding of adjacency benefits among the organizations to enable intentional placement within the future space. So today, we've seen that for the most part, pretty much every department is split at least onto multiple floors. Some, like council, for example, we have space on the first floor and here on the 5th floor. And it's challenging during council hearings to go up and down stairs. And then also in some cases, we've seen that departments are split across different buildings. So we have the planning department saying they need to wheel their giant plans down the street to this building when they have presentations. And also just being split across different floors, you end up losing significant amount of square footage there, whereas employees who work together can be sharing space. So one of our primary goals in our conceptual stacking plans we put together was to co-locate all divisions together within departments, if possible all on the same floor, but for departments that have more square footage than a floor plate allows, they would be on contiguous floors. And then also co-location between different departments that were noted, primarily the mayor's office and CAO would be co-located, and then some of the supporting functions such as law and HR would be on contiguous floors. And then also having the Development Services Center group, so planning services, code enforcement, historic preservation, all co-located with each other, since often customers are going to all those groups when they're going for one service, and also they collaborate, it sounds like, pretty much throughout the day. And finance, of course, we heard having the service centers in 2 different buildings and 2 different entrances is confusing, and so having that all co-located and adjacent to the finance admin offices is also accommodated in our conceptual stacking plans. Is there any question? Yep.
So in terms of taking aside from government employees, when we talk about the customer service, the public facing part of it, were you all able to engage with those people seeking basically our services, or just regular residents who are using it to see what works for them?
No, that was not part of this work thus far. So we do think that's an important next step for the city to undertake, but we have not done any like public surveys or focus groups or anything of that nature. That said, we've got some ideas on the customer service element and how you would potentially create 2 of these customer service centers that would, improve the customer experience and probably drive a lot of benefits to that side. But we haven't spoken to individuals about it.
Vice Mayor, we did talk about doing that during this period, but we determined it best first to understand what we're working with, so that we could go with something for the public to react to. And so I am hopeful that if council is agreeable to move forward with the project, then that is one of our next steps.
Any more questions?
I think one.
Oh yeah.
Touchdown seats. Just
Oh yes. And
it doesn't have to be that. Just
oh, okay. Well, another thing that we incorporated is a new space type. In addition to community space, larger council chambers, development services center, financial services center, we would have touchdown seating. We've heard that often there will be non-downtown Lexington employees coming downtown for meetings, and there's nowhere to really sit down and pull up their laptop and work in between meetings or before or after. And also a key adjacency that was noted was finance with like CAO, mayor's office, HR, but they're for the most part located where the customer service area is. So we would provide a dedicated touchdown suite for finance to be closer to those groups. So, if they're meeting often, they don't need to go back and forth. They would have a dedicated area.
And did you guys consider things that we don't have, like, did you consider a cafeteria? Did you consider food,
Yes.
library, all stuff like that?
Yes, we built out a model also having
The tax.
called an employee hub, but a significant central square footage dedicated to gathering space for employees to just come, bring their food, socialize. That doesn't exist today.
But even us preparing food, do you think of that? I'm just thinking,
We didn't
do
get to
have-
that level of design, but
He wants it.
you have the space. You have the space if you want to design them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 2 things to think about with cafeterias, right? Because a lot of people ask about this. So first, a lot of people are moving away from cafeterias.
Yeah.
And it's, for a few reasons. Number one, it's expensive, right, to find a provider to come in and run that. Number two, right, you have, maybe not as close as you'd like them, but you do have restaurants and businesses here that would benefit from serving the workforce. And number two, I think having like a really flexible approach to food is something that a lot of organizations, including governments, are looking at, where you have smaller options like grab and go type of stuff that does not require the infrastructure of a full cafeteria.
Micro markets. Yeah.
Micro markets. So I know the purview of this study is not to talk about like design and all those things, but I just want to get your take on, because for us, options moving forward, the most likely options moving forward, if we want to have a complete redesign, is either we find a building and renovate it, or we build a building from scratch, right? If we build a building from scratch, we get to do it however we want to do it. If we take an existing building, there are going to be limitations. Hopefully we're not going to find another little hotel like this one. But what are your thoughts on those kind of challenges, like those two models? Like obviously one is fairly clear, but like how possible?
Really good segue.
How possible is all this stuff to do renovating an existing building?
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, I guess.
So I'll pass it over to Mark to discuss our implementation options.
That was a great segue, because
Yeah.
that's what we'll focus on next. And,
I do this all the time. I'm very patient.
Mark held 16 years with EY, focused on public sector real estate, worked with many states and city governments doing real estate strategy, workplace strategy, these types of studies, and many different components of real estate projects. So thank you all, and great to be here. So what we're going to look at now is, the main objective of the project was to really determine and calculate and run scenarios on how much square footage does the government need in a future state environment, wherever that may be, right? But what we wanted to do was take it even a bit further and give you some conceptual options on how you could achieve that roughly 160,000 gross square footage requirement. So we put together 4 different implementation options here. I'll just explain what each of them are. In A, which we're calling essential modifications, what you would do is start by demoing the government center garage. So we know that garage has many challenges. It really will need to be addressed in the future, whatever you decide to do. So we would likely demo that garage and replace it with flat lot parking. So it's sort of a path of least resistance where you wouldn't necessarily build on it, at least for now, but you can add to your parking. That would certainly help with some of the parking capacity challenges. Put a flat lot on that footprint, and then focus your real renovation efforts on this building, on Government Center, and on Phoenix. You'd like to be able to get out of Switow because you wouldn't need that space. You'd have enough capacity between the 2 main buildings. But what you would need to do is to basically do a full renovation and restacking of the 2 core buildings, Government Center and Phoenix Building. Okay? In B, we take it a little bit further. So yes, we take down the garage, but instead of putting the flat lot, you look at building an extension to Government Center on that footprint. That will essentially replace the square footage and a little bit optimized, but it'll sort of swap the square footage that you have at Phoenix Building today into the extension here. So then you could be in a position to ultimately release or exit Phoenix Building and Switow together. And you'd have a more consolidated operation here at Government Center with this building and the new extension joined together really as one complex. We'll talk about what could potentially go into that extension. In C and D, again to your point, Vice Mayor, we're really looking at different degrees of alternatives. So C is, can we purchase or find an existing office building that would obviously need to be renovated and reconfigured to some extent? Hopefully it's not a hotel. But could you go somewhere else, make an acquisition, potentially do a renovation project, and have a new city hall, all consolidated within one building, ideally, with parking and other features that we've talked about and that you would certainly want in a new facility. In D, we look at ground up construction. So that is really, could you identify a parcel, right? Could you acquire a parcel? Could you potentially look at a third-party developer, investor to, look at a public-private partnership type of format where perhaps it's not just City Hall, but there's also other components going on to a master plan development, right? We've sometimes seen these where there could be restaurants, there could be housing, there could be other types of assets that purely from a third-party developer standpoint might yield a bit more than a City Hall building, but combined into one complex, you could have an attractive type of project for somebody to launch into. So that's a very different strategy, obviously, than what we talk about in A and B. And there would need to be a lot of variables figured out for both C and D. But we wanted to at least show you really the full range of possibilities here as you think about how do you achieve the square footage that you'll need for the future. What we've done here, you'll see, costs in total square footage. So on cost, right, these are clearly high-level ranges. This is not anything like a full design initiative, like we've said. This is not, working with technical A&E firms to develop costs. This is really at, let's call it the cost per square foot level of what these things might require to achieve, generally speaking, what we're talking about here. So we look at, yes, hard costs and soft costs and other components of construction and renovation costs, and we did our best to try and range things based on different levels of effort. For example, the cost to build the extension would likely be different from the cost to renovate this existing building. It would be different from the cost to renovate Phoenix. So we've put those assumptions in place. Again, we can't say that they're perfect, but we think that they're at least directional. So we've also factored in, acquisition, costs that you might need for C and D. We've looked at, roughly speaking, what type of parcel would you need to buy, how much could it cost? Again, very high level, but just to really put together kind of some t-shirt sizes of different cost buckets here that you can try to get a sense for, at the end of the day, how much will this sort of total, right? On the gross square footage that you see here, what we've done is we basically take the square footage after all of these projects are done and after any buildings that were suggested are exited or released, like a Swy Tower or Phoenix in certain scenarios, after those are gone. So this is the square footage that you're left with. And it's actually an interesting comparison. Obviously in C and D, it will very much depend what you were to go ahead and purchase or what you were to go ahead and build. So, you could go a bit bigger, you could go a bit smaller, there's obviously flexibility there. But in A and B, we know the buildings that we're dealing with. We know roughly that an extension would be something like 60,000 square feet on this building. So we've got a more sort of defined set of data on A and B. So that leaves you with roughly 240,000 square feet gross on A and 214 gross on B. Just from looking at those two numbers, B is a pretty reasonable number, we would basically say, based on the requirements that were calculated. A might give you a little bit too much space. So that might be something that you would think about going forward is, do we really need all of the space that A would provide, right? And keep in mind, that's because we've got both Phoenix and Government Center in renovated form, optimized, smaller space standards, more efficient, smaller hallways. We get more people in, we get more furniture in. Do we really need all that space? So just something to think about. We're not saying one is right or wrong. It's just a picture of kind of what you get at the end of this. Okay, this just summarizes here the space needs by the department level. Not going to go through each department, and definitely something that you can, take back to your teams and to your groups and kind of think about this a bit more. We've talked about adjacencies in the earlier part, and I do want to reiterate that because anytime you're going to do a restacking project, really the point is to take advantage of those adjacencies that by nature, and all governments do this, right? You have a need tomorrow, you find space and you fill the need, but you don't necessarily think about really which departments, which sub-departments, which divisions should be sitting next to each other because they actually collaborate a lot, or they don't, right? So that's just what we would be very conscious of in doing this type of restacking. And those are kind of the main ones that we called out through the analysis: the mayor's office and the CAO, EQPW, HACD, planning preservation, council and chambers. Definitely heard that the fact that those two, the chambers and the offices, are separated today is not ideal. If we were doing this over, we probably wouldn't have that separation. And then public safety and downtown entertainment as another important one. Also because of kind of their modes of transportation, the bikes, the vehicles that they're using to deliver their mission, and needing to be on probably the first floor because of what they do. We did talk a bit about additional space types. I'll just highlight a few of these, and in each of these implementation options, you can achieve these additional space types. It really just becomes a question of how large, how many, and where do you put them. So for example, smaller break areas, all of our plans here are distributing the smaller break areas throughout these floor plates, because that's, while you have the large employee hub that we've talked about, you also want to make sure that you have some of the smaller break areas. In reviewing the buildings, we've seen sort of makeshift break areas, and that can certainly be a point of talent attraction, talent retention, when you can really make those areas a bit nicer. Plumbing, coffee, cold water, sinks.
Yeah, we don't have a sink in our break room.
Yeah,
Little things. Little things can go a long way, and that's all part of this. We've talked about touchdown. Central conference area, that is one I want to mention, and this is also something many governments and companies, space users for that matter, are moving towards. Instead of having the large conference collaboration rooms spread out throughout the buildings, people are moving towards a central conference center. And we actually think you have a pretty decent space to do that in the ballroom, just by running some high-level numbers on the size. Acoustics, that's obviously a challenge. It's hard to sit in cubes in the ballroom, but that could be an opportunity thinking down the road is, can you convert that into more of a conference center that could have different types of configurations, right? So you'd want like demountable walls and things like that where rooms could range in size in terms of capacity. We know you've got boards and commissions, right, coming for meetings in the evening and needing different size spaces. So having a conference center like that, I think would be really important for the government. I think you get a lot of really good use out of it. De-escalation space, just wanted to highlight. So we talked a bit about customer serving functions, right? If you were to think about those types of customer service centers today, and what would go into that design, they would probably look a bit different than what you have today. So, governments are looking at like small rooms for de-escalation purposes, right? So you get disgruntled folks coming in, right, for services or bill payment or whatever it may be. It's beneficial to have spaces where you can kind of separate, let somebody go collect their thoughts, spend a few minutes, grab a water bottle and whatnot, and then come back and try to figure it out. So those are just some of the small types of features that if we were designing a customer service center in the future, we would want to include things like that. Okay. So this looks like a lot, and I'm not going to go through every line, but what this is a stacking diagram. So often when you're restacking a building, right, and putting different departments on different floors with different square footage requirements and different needs, you take an approach like this that basically puts everything together and splits up the floor plates. So we did this at a high level. We're not saying this is the way it needs to be or this is the absolute best way, but we want to give you a little bit of a view into the future of what it could look like, and this is for implementation options A and B. Keep in mind, again, A and B, we know the floor plates, we know how much space we have, we know, roughly speaking, the level of reconfiguration we want to see, so we can do it for those two scenarios at this high level. For C and D, where you're either buying a new building or building a new building, you've got a few unknowns there where you'd have to define those needs a bit more in order to kind of get to this level for those two options. But I'm just going to highlight a few things that I think are kind of interesting on this. I'm going to start with B on the right, and I think a very good question is, well, if we took the approach of taking down the garage, right, because we kind of need to, and we built the extension, what would we actually put in the extension, right? Some of the initial thinking here is that we think there's an opportunity for that extension to be really focused on public serving spaces, where the extension actually really becomes the public part of City Hall. And this building really becomes more of the employee workspace and more of the private spaces where you don't necessarily want folks walking around if they don't have to. That does a few things, right? Number one, it focuses the investments and the costs on really the public service and bringing people into the building for various needs versus just on the employees alone and the work experience, which is important. But it's always helpful to say that these investments are targeted at the public and bringing people into City Hall and engaging them in the civic process in a new or different way than you may have in the past. Number two, this would really give you the opportunity to introduce, what we would call leading practice space types. So you talk about a new council chambers. If we were building an extension to the back of this building, it's likely that you might build a new council chambers as part of that extension. It is also likely that we would be reserving part of that space for what we call community space. And that could take any different shape or form. That could be art focused, it could be event space, it could be something historical about Lexington or Kentucky, or there's different things you could do with a true community-oriented space that would help bring the public into the building, not to pay bills or not to handle official business, but for other purposes. And that's the type of thing that, to the point earlier about, have we done any community sounding, on any of these ideas? No, not yet. But that's something that, if you're going to set aside a certain percentage of your space for public purposes or community benefits, those are good questions to, I think, go out to the public and see what they would actually like in their City Hall. That would give you a good opportunity to do it here. Also a good opportunity to introduce the Development Services Center and the Financial Services Center in the new space, because those are supposed to be customer-focused, customer-serving functions. And again, being able to do that in the new extension means you likely have more flexibility in how you design those spaces, because you may have some limitations, but you won't have all the limitations of working within the floor plates of this building here, right? So those could really become leading practice DSC and FSC spaces. We're seeing a lot of traction in those spaces. We know that your government, had sort of an effort around the Development Services Center a few years back that was maybe a bit short-lived. We might look at it a bit differently, and I think there's probably opportunity to revisit what that space really means and how you bring different departments together. For development services, this model was actually started by Austin. They have a wonderful development services center. Our clients in Nashville essentially replicated that development services center, and they've recently decided that actually what they did was not big enough because it's such a successful space that they're going to be doubling it in the next few years. So these spaces are gaining a lot of traction, and we've seen in these spaces, right, contractors and people in the development community coming in and having technical discussions and pulling out plans, and that's like really the essence of government and public and infrastructure folks working together, and it's a nice thing to see. So you'd have the opportunity to put that, from a clean sheet of paper to design your own DSC and the FSC into the new space. We'd also try to co-locate, obviously, the offices, supporting those types of functions, so the council offices, finance, EQPW offices in that space as well, because you're going to be very much mixed in with the public and delivering services and doing council meetings and like we said before. So, ideas on the extension. Again, not to say that that needs to be what's in the extension, but give you a sense of what it could look like. So the next question would be, well, what do you do with some of the, kind of the key spaces you have today in this building? we talked about the conference center, right? We think there's an opportunity there in the ballroom. Have to figure out some of the acoustics, but there's certainly ways to do these things. And to make that a really nice configurable space for different boards, commissions, employee groups, trainings, whatever. What could you do with the existing council chambers? We've thought about maybe that's a decent location for your employee hub. There's obviously different ways to look at this. You have very historic council chambers. It's, you have beautiful ceilings and ornate details and all that. You wouldn't necessarily want to lose that to the extent that you don't need to. So maybe you could convert that into something that's really multi-purpose in nature. It could be employee hub. It could be, mayor, a space for you to meet with different departments or do stand-up discussions with employees. More of a casual space. You could look at different types of furniture, different layouts. Not necessarily an auditorium, but something that's more configurable and maybe a little bit softer in design that really brings people together. So options around that. I'm sure there's other options as well. Moving back to option A. Again, in option A we have no extension, right? So this is just using the space we have in Phoenix and using the space we have today in Government Center. So the way we would probably do this is to really focus the Financial Services Center, Development Services Center functions in Phoenix. So that would mean the finance functions that are sitting in Government Center Switow today, moving over to Phoenix and really grouping those two together. So sort of the financial arm of government, the bill pay, your budgeting, all the different finance functions, with the development arm of government, all sitting in Phoenix. Obviously that whole building would need to be reconfigured. There's actually opportunities on the lobby floor of Phoenix. You could probably better use that space than you are today. And it could serve as the FSC and the DSC space that in the other model we were putting into the new extension. We would obviously look to renovate the remainder of Government Center on the top. But in this case, right, like council chambers would be council chambers. You could potentially expand it a bit, but I don't think it would be significant, right? The only opportunity would be, could you bump it back kind of into the room behind the dais? So there could be options around that, which could be helpful. There's certainly IT improvements you could make. Maybe you look at a slightly different reconfiguration of the chambers itself, but again, you wouldn't be getting like the 50% larger council chambers that you would in B. So you just note some of these differences as you think about, what may or may not work.
From looking at your implementation options, you're still considering 12 floors of this building then. You're not eliminating floors by adding square footage.
You're not adding any square footage to this building.
So, but you're still looking at 12 floors.
You could probably make better use of the basement, but other than that, you're not adding floors.
So on space use, do you feel like I kind of generally feel like we have too many hallways, and hallways take up room. But like my guess is you take that into consideration when you're contemplating how these spaces are designed, right?
Yeah, some of that is structural, right? This building was not meant to be an office building. And the way buildings are designed and built today is very different from the way this building was designed. All your center supports, all your structural beams are in the middle of the building, right? We can do that on the outside now. So there are limitations. But the idea would be, to every extent you can, when you restack these floors, try to simplify the floor plates. Your floor plates are confusing in here from walking around.
There's a lot of, it seems like double hallways. You come out to the sort of lobby, and then in the internal compartments, you have another hallway. And so if you start to reconfigure this, then you start to eliminate some of that and make better use of the space. But I agree, there's a lot of hallways.
So some of this we've talked about in talking through the options, but this is really just meant to show, at a high level, what are some of the key benefits and key challenges within each of these implementation options. One of the things that I would note here, just because we haven't talked about it before, is in option A, because we have a good chunk of square footage in A, right? We have both Government Center and Phoenix Building. We are able to accommodate PVA and Friends of the Court, which would be helpful to be able to continue serving them, right? In option B, where we have a bit smaller square footage overall, we would not be able to accommodate both of those. So there's a few kind of components of option B that, you know, we haven't necessarily put into the cost model, but to the extent that you might actually have to go take a new lease for PVA or other departments like that, other things to think about, right, when you reduce the footprint a bit. I think the other thing about B, which we haven't really talked about, but from a placemaking or from an architectural standpoint, to us, B is interesting to real estate people here, because two things, right? Number one, you have the ability to really combine what's old and what's new, which is always makes for a really, really bold statement type of facility. And the second thing is that, you know, you've already done a lot of work on the backside of the building with the greenway. There's parking in there back there that we would have to figure out, but it really gives you the opportunity to think about that true customer public entrance in the back of the building that's better integrated with streetscape and greenway in a way that you don't really do it on Main Street. We like the idea of that dual entrance, right, to City Hall. There's security benefits, clearly, but it also just makes things a bit easier for people coming into the building who are not here every day. So we talk a bit about activating spaces, right? There's a lot of activation in B that you may be able to achieve that perhaps in A you don't. Just something to think about.
Let me ask you a question. When you're looking at this implementation option, are you looking at phases? Could this be done in phases? Because of one thing I think is almost certain, the garage needs to go one way or the other, and that's probably a given. But as far as that, you still got to phase things in, or can you phase things in under your all's implementation options?
We put together a roadmap. So short answer is yes. We looked at it at a high level. We looked at, how long would these types of projects take to achieve? And how would you phase it from a sort of programming, design, construction, phasing standpoint? Now that said, we did not, get into like detailed timelines of, temporary moves, short-term needs, backfilled space. All of that would need to be considered, right? Really, well, except for the ones where you're going to a brand new facility that the city does not own or occupy today, right? In A and B, there's disruption in both of those options. And people, departments will be impacted. So there's going to be some short-term fixes that would be required as you implement those two. So timeline, yes, at a high level, but not very detailed just yet. Another sort of view of pros and cons, or what could be favorable or neutral or unfavorable to the government on this. Some of this we've talked through already. We've looked at business disruption. We looked at, parking. Frankly, can be a challenge in most of these. So that's something that will need to be studied a bit more. We've looked at concepts like what's the impact to public property, right? If the government is to go acquire a new building, right? What does that mean if the government is potentially taking a building off the tax rolls, right? There's impacts to that, and those are things that the government should think about. So we've tried to layer in some of those sort of pros and cons here. But I'll just ask, do any of these options strike you as a preferable option at this stage?
I'm personally a fan of the ground up construction, just in the sense of it's kind of, we can get to our pie in the sky of exactly how we want the building to look, how we want the flow of it, and we don't have to make as many compromises in the way that we do in a renovation. But that's purely on that.
And my thought with that is property downtown. Where we're going, yeah, so.
I think there's pros and cons to every single option. I am really happy that Ely gave us this many options to consider.
Can I go back to your phasing question again? I think a lot of it then depends on the final design and what you can live with. Can you live? I mean, it's gonna be what some of the infrastructure is. So if you're having to redo all the plumbing, it's gonna be hard for floors to work and not work, you know, kinds of things in elevators. And timelines will be extended if you start to phase. So there's some trade-offs as you start to get into, if you stayed here and did an addition or however that it may make sense to move out for a year and then move back in. I mean, those are just decisions that'll have to be made once you get into it with your design team. So it's not, yeah, it's gonna hurt a little bit, but.
My guess is though too, I mean, if we did a ground up, and I just think of like the parking lot in the back, you know, so we take over the parking lot, we do a ground up in the parking lot in the back on its own. I mean, these two buildings, we could surplus and sell. So I mean, we have there's just a net difference that you're dealing with, right?
If you do ground up, then all of your space you could
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
I think it's important when you do ground up, just like Vice Mayor said, we've got security and technology that we've got to implement into a new facility. And if you go ground up, I would think it would be a lot easier to do that.
I think with either scenario, as you look at the next steps, right, the change management piece of this is going to be critical, right? Just because I think you do want to implement new ways of working in the future, and maybe not be as traditional as you are today in your existing space. So thinking through what that's really going to look like, how people are going to work, and what they need to work efficiently. So I think regardless of the solution, that's something you're gonna have to think about and consider. And yeah, was mentioned technology, right? Because it's gonna be critical to make it work within this building, especially more hybrid working, getting rid of the desktops that you have to VPN into.
But typically in a renovation of a multi-level building, I do not believe you've got the whole thing from day one. I think you go floor by floor. Usually you build on it. So
That's scary.
yeah.
There's lots of options to do that.
Business disruption's the big concern.
Yeah.
What swing space can you make leverageable?
Yeah.
It's over 100, 105 or 2.
Well, it's unforeseen expenses and yeah.
I mean, this building, to your point, I would suspect there's asbestos,
Oh, yeah.
there's all kind of, I'm looking at John's
For sure.
sheet. So, in this case, it might be a building that you've got
Yeah.
because of all the issues.
Yeah.
I don't know,
But I mean, when they do those typically though, they're able to do that because these are concrete floor, like it's, but I get what you're saying. It's just,
Yeah.
the big issue is you've got to, you end up having to run all your everything kind of has to run first to where it's supposed to go or whatever, right? So that's
Well, the biggest issue is displacement.
yeah.
Like, how do we still function?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that can work. Yeah.
If we use COVID as an example, we were
We sent
somewhat
half our
displaced.
employees home.
Yeah, it is kind of what it did
So
work.
we've done it, we can do it again.
Yeah.
So
so drawn. But how old is this building right here?
105 years old or 110, I
But
can't remember.
but the concept of building something adjacent to the back of it, wrecking the garage, building something adjacent to the back of it, finishing that, moving
frees up
partial
some
staff,
floors.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a way to.
Using that as the staging area.
Using that as the way that,
Displacements.
yeah, to displace, to get out the displacement.
Did you all look at all at ballpark timelines on any of these potential projects?
We have it on our, I don't know if it's in this one.
It's in,
We did.
Yeah.
It's not included in the packet that we've delivered to you guys. Roughly looking about 3.5 years. We did take your budgeting cycle into account.
For any of these, for all four options?
For all of them, yep. In early 2028, we basically have everything done by early 2028. Given you can start some of the programming and design later this year, right? There is some budget, I believe, already in place to do an RFP to perhaps bring on an A&E that's going to do your more detailed level design and programming. Then based on that, you have something that you can go out to a larger RFP for construction and then get a number for that to go into your budget. And we have your budget in Q4 of 2024 calendar year starting, right, with the approvals happening mid-2025 and construction starting end of 2025, putting you at occupancy on all four by 2028.
And they'll all be, I mean, they all take a long time.
Several years.
So my thinking on it is, and I know you didn't quite get to finish this yet, Mark, but we are looking at, and there's several folks missing, but what we're looking at is what is best to do for the future, right? Many people on the council, maybe me, we won't be here. It's what is best for the future and for what those current council members, and if it's a new mayor, a new administration, what would be best for our future? And I think this really has given a great picture of the options for that. I mean, I think about if we could do a new build, all the energy efficiencies we could really get in there easier, and there's just so much, but I think any of the details can be working on whatever we go with.
So there's not an option, because this is a historic building, even though there's a lot of issues with it, and there's probably asbestos everywhere. Well, we know there's some mold issues, etc. We can't demo this building or the inside and keep the facade and just build here in this footprint and start. So would that be which option?
A or B.
A or B would basically require that complete.
But A and B do not say demo this building.
You're not demoing
You're
it.
renovating the interior.
You're leaving the outside walls.
The same, but
you can go in.
completely gutting the inside. Okay, so I just wasn't sure if it was like remodeling or if it was.
New systems, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they might, for example, choose, if that's the option, to move the whole elevator stack somewhere else.
Correct.
To move the plumbing somewhere else.
But you're essentially gonna have the same
Floors.
footprint,
Yeah,
it's
right.
gonna be the same.
Or some of the historical components, like if you wanted to maintain the chambers with the ceiling, like finding a way to design around that, or only gutting 2 and up instead of 1 and up or something.
Okay.
And there's probably some components on the first floor you'll have to keep and work in, so.
Yes, the lobby.
Yes.
Well, I mean, because there's, I think, relocating or having ground up construction somewhere else sounds nice, but we all know that it's hard to agree on a location that's right here downtown.
We
So-
don't know that yet.
Well,
we?
from the past.
Okay, this is a
councils
new
that
day.
have done
This is a new day. Everybody here has open minds.
and argued
Right?
extensively about where
That's
this building
over.
should be.
New council.
Well, but we also never
New
had
council,
this kind
new
of
thinking.
information.
Yeah.
In those conversations, we never knew that we could go with a building that was smaller than we had.
Well, lots changed since then.
Yeah, I think,
I think it's a very fair point though to think about what happens to Main Street if you were to go
Exactly.
somewhere else.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm always up.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
The market now is not great. Like there's a lot of vacancy out there. You would essentially be adding to the vacancy.
Right.
And nothing, I don't think anything says, Martin Luther King is not that's not a state road, is it? No.
This is, and you still can't do it.
There's MLK is not a state road, so if we knocked out that viaduct, we have another area.
Bridge.
No, I think that's that little road. Well, that, so there's Water Street, which is what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Two of them.
Buildings on top.
There's a parking garage over there.
do you think, well, does anybody else have questions?
I think James Brown does.
Oh.
Good job.
Send you, he has 8, he has.
We'd have had one built 2 years ago if James would have come
Oh,
along.
God! We're not talking about the past.
I couldn't get him online. We had it.
Mayor, is there like a work group, an advisory group, I guess, that's been working on this that forges ahead? I don't know if that's
Yes. I mean, we would love a lot of your input, and I want to show you the first, on the right. That first question is the big one, right? I mean, we don't have to decide it today, but I think everybody needs to think about it. Those are the kinds of things that will lead us to implementation of something. And I mean, I am an eternal optimist. I think this group of people has the best shot out of the last 25 years of getting the desperately needed new city hall, whether it's a renovation, a new build, whatever. And that's sort of why we started here, is you all have given some great options and studied what we really need space-wise.
Could I just ask for, it's just a candid question on how, because it obviously also has to be sold. Like it's a project that kind of has to be sold.
Yeah.
So how would you suggest we sell it to constituents?
I think that the council, I have been, I think the key, well, let me just back up a second. In my estimation, with the one from Mayor Miller, the one from Mayor Isaac, the one from Mayor Newberry, the 2 from Mayor Gray, there was never, ever council consensus that led it forward. And part of that, I know with the early ones, and Fred, you'll remember some of this, a plan was just brought and thrust upon the council, and that will never get there with that kind of an, and they all weren't that way. I mean, but there has got to be collaboration and discussion between council members and the administration, because everybody's gonna be in wherever we go. And I think, looking back, that key piece is what killed some of them. Is, it was just handed to us. Here's what we're gonna do. You all know already that doesn't work.
Well, I mean, I look back at, on a previous slide, and we all know it, we have $20 million worth of deferred maintenance in these 3 buildings. And that's a quarter of what it would cost for us to do one of these new buildings. You'll hear, I mean, I've said it a million times, like,
And is this
no, we're just,
is this currently, do we have any committee, the council members, like?
No.
And is that something that maybe should take place? Because if we're gonna focus on
it's called
it.
the budget.
I know.
Vote on the
I know.
next.
Well, some of it is about space, not just the budget.
Yeah.
From my perspective, Dave, what we're doing is sort of building the foundational information
Yeah.
that will help us all move to a decision together.
Yeah, but I think it's gotta be administrative led.
Well,
I'm
that's-
big on that because I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
And unless you come out of the mayor's office, then it, kind of shifts down. I don't think you've got a problem out there with constituency, trying to sell the situation there when you can look at the cost of it, what it's costing us to stay where we're at. We can pay for a new building. We already pretty much know that.
Well, I don't know that because
We've got those stats.
I know, but we're like 6 months in.
Right, I
Yeah,
So,
understand.
yeah, so I mean, but I would love, like, I'm totally into ROI, so,
Yeah. What I think is these kind of continuing conversations, next step. So
Yeah.
So these are some questions
This is
we've
great.
all got to figure out.
yeah.
And to work on it together with good, solid information.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be one of these probably early on that we all say, that is not gonna work. And it goes out. I think it's a process that we've gotta keep working on together.
And some of these decisions might be driven by market forces and availability. Like we could say we want option,
Yeah.
D all we want, and not be able to find the land.
Well, so my thoughts of the next step, location. That's, location has always been, even before this plan, of what you put in that location. We've got to determine and we've got to have a consensus on location. Once we do that, don't you think
So-
we've started?
So look at the first question on the right.
Are we willing to meet?
Are we
Is-
willing,
is
are we
LFUCG
willing to leave the government center?
Yeah,
Yes.
willing to leave this.
Center, moving on.
I mean, that would be a nice one to have consensus around, wouldn't it? Because that tells us a lot.
I certainly feel like we can make that decision without more information.
Well, maybe one of the next steps is an RFI to see if anybody has interest in this building. Because leaving this building vacant for an extended period of time will causes me concern.
No, you just implode this building.
Well,
That's the solution. You implode this
it's
building.
100-year-old, it was historic.
It is.
It has good moat. So maybe that's one potential next step is an RFI. Request for.
That's gonna be in the paper tomorrow, Brett.
Well,
I'll stand behind it.
That's the next campaign slogan.
so to my way of thinking, you all, because I've already made my decision, or I wouldn't have gone through all this with the consultants and our teams, is need to figure out if you want a city hall that works.
Of course we do.
That's what this is about.
And you got $6 million in the
It's-
budget.
Yes,
To
to
talk about
get,
it, to get it
yes, to
going.
get it going.
Okay.
And we can go out and look at for that, was it the second option? Or the
The
one that
second
took
option is-
another building and renovated, I can't remember which.
It was
B. So we can still do some things to go out there and see what are the possibilities of a building that's out there that we could have totally renovated, get out of this building. I mean, that's one of the options. We can gather more information like that. Yeah.
Are there
And
any?
also, it goes to the location. Are we willing to move, do we want to move from downtown? No.
No, we have to be downtown
That's
from
what I'm
my
thinking,
view.
so that
Pretty
goes
much
to
where it's
property.
I mean, you look at all the people downtown who use the building. It's, I mean, somebody a few years ago said, put it out at Jacobson Park. And I said, that's a terrible idea. I mean, there's a lot of land out there.
But
But
this is
the
center.
users, a lot of the users are right here. When you think of attorneys and banks and legal people and all police and, I mean, that's just my,
I concur.
yeah.
To me, the answers to some of these questions are contingent on the situations. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
would we be willing to leave here for a less than ideal situation in a new
Yes.
location? Then no, we would rather stay here, do something better with it. But
So one of the things that we could do is to, I'm looking at, and the second bullet, I believe, given what happened in Mayor Gray's very first proposal, which we had an RFP actually go out with a selected firm come back. This would have become, someone was going to renovate this with historic tax credits into condominiums, as well as the Swito building. And then that was the one we were gonna put on top of the transit center, which we had all that in place, and then we found out, oops, we can't use the top of the transit center. Look at it, John. Oh, did you change your mind? I remember that. Oh, for heaven's sakes.
We were gonna build over there.
It's complicated. There's federal dollars in that building. But anyway, I think, James, to your point is, I want to stay open to, I believe someone will want this building. And I think it's early to put an ROI out to see who wants this building before we even know where or what we want to do. So on that one about finding large office buildings, we can go out and gather information on that for the council.
I was gonna say, what are the next
We
steps
can,
as you see?
well, that's what, one of which I'm saying, I'd love to know how you all feel about number one.
Right now?
I'm just curious if you would entertain leaving this building.
I'm willing to do whatever works for the future of Lexington. That's what my
Okay,
answer
good.
will always be.
Yes.
It's not about us right now, it's about the leaders that will be coming up behind us.
That's
So,
exactly.
Well, and how we can serve the
Yes.
community.
Yes.
I mean, I think if we are looking at efficiencies, customer-facing efficiencies, financial efficiencies, and how we operate
Mhm.
as a government, and so on. I mean, I think we just have to weigh our options on
Mhm.
which one provides
Yes.
more benefits.
Mhm.
That's right. Kathy, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna say, when we've looked at some of the other states that have, or cities that have done this, many of these other city halls are done in concert with some other type of programming, right? A library, some kind of a museum, a senior living facility. So maybe as, you were talking about getting some public perspective, I don't know, maybe there's something that you know about that's in the market where somebody else is looking to make some kind of a investment. That might be something to consider if you are gonna think about a ground up construction opportunity, because that may help offset some of the costs or increase fundraising or make it more publicly viable.
What information would you all like to see that would help you move forward?
First, I'm curious about, so the steering committee, is this steering committee for this project particularly? For just the space study? Okay. So my question would be, I feel like this needs some sort of committee or task force to kind of keep pushing things forward. How do we go about figuring out who's going to do that? That will keep
We can put together a new, that's what I think we were thinking, a new steering committee to take the space study, look at more the options within the space study and bring forward information. That's what I think would be kind of common sense, maybe.
That sounds good. That helps us work through some more of the if-then situations, even just practically speaking, for all of our different options we've started to talk about here. And it gives us some more time to imagine what it would be like.
Sally, do you have ideas that you want to throw in?
No, I think that through the steering committee, I would think one of our first things we would need to do is to look at, is to perhaps hire a as a real estate person. When we look at these buildings, we know what kind of space we need, and to see if there's anything in town that serves that. And that certainly would knock out a huge office, I mean, that thing as well. It is one.
Yeah.
Then you know where you're going. You're either in here, or you're developing somewhere between here and the library.
Right.
I mean, you know, we have looked at knocking out everything all the way up, and using the police stations and the county clerk and all that. You know, really, looking at that, it would give you, it would start to really narrow down the location.
I think that's the first step, because we can't decide, do we want to go somewhere else or not, if we don't know if there's
We need to
somewhere
know
else
if
that
there's
exists.
some buildings that are available to be closed, that are close to that square footage.
Don't we have some information on that on the shelf, that last study that we did
We,
4 years ago?
we looked at just, we looked at the library, and we didn't look at, we looked at more locations where we could build. I don't think there's any time for somebody to look at, because you might find that a building that has 150,000 square feet, it's got exactly the same problems that we have here. That they were built a long time ago, and they're just as cut up as we are.
We don't want to buy another thing like this. Or P3.
We've got some good options in front of us. We need to look at ways to narrow down from 4 down to 3 and 2. And if that's a way to take one of those options off of us.
Because it comes back to Fred's major thing. The major thing is location. Get that location, then you go from there.
And just a little history lesson. I was on the council in 1980 when we came across the street here to look at this building. And it was supposed to be temporary.
Yes. How come you let that happen?
I got off the council. That was Scotty Basler's. That was Scotty Basler's.
Wow.
Yes.
So how about we come back?
It's temporary though.
You and, yeah, how about we come back with a steering committee? We can go ahead and look at some of those commercial buildings. I mean, we've really talked about that already, looking to see if there are a couple that we could look at to.
If we use a commercial real estate firm, then we don't have to get involved with real estate.
Well, you know,
That's what we tripped the last time, so
another point on that though, we already, in past councils though, we pretty much come up with the conclusion, we've got a downtown map. And it's laid out, and we came to the conclusion, more than one council, I think, that said, this is where we're gonna stay. Downtown, and there's a map that has the downtown, all the properties. But that was part of that thing that we looked at.
The proposals have been very interesting. Mayor Isaac proposed connecting this building, tearing down the Helix garage and connecting a new building all the way across. You'd have to close the viaduct. And that went nowhere. But there've been really interesting proposals.
And we never contemplated the concept, because I know you're on the Lexington Center board, of activating the space that's being activated next to the Lexington Center.
That was not in, and that's not in the downtown map either. The Civic Center. It's not in the downtown.
No, I'm talking about the one at the website. We never went.
Yeah, okay.
This is a great start.
No, not town branch. No, I think that thing's great. But I mean, that's kind of where our.
Thank you all so much for your work on this. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was really
Yeah, but
helpful.
that's what we probably ought to.
Thank you.